The old man's hands trembled as he held the photograph, worn at the edges from years of being pulled from his shirt pocket. It was taken on a summer day in 1987, his daughter Sarah, 8 years old, squinting into the sun, her smile bright enough to break your heart. She was gone now, 23 years in the ground, and he still carried her picture everywhere. Some people had their addictions or their demons. Tom had grief, thick and suffocating, the kind that made you feel like you were drowning in the middle of a crowded room. It was grief that had landed him on the streets 5 years ago, after his wife passed. It was grief that had turned him into the kind of man people looked through rather than at. His clothes hung loose on his frame, stitched together with hope and regret. His beard had grown wild and gray, and there was a permanent squint in his left eye from years of sleeping in the sun. Nobody saw Tom anymore. Nobody really saw him. But Tom saw everything. He'd been sleeping behind the warehouses on 5th Street when the disaster struck. He woke to sirens and shouting, crawled out from his cardboard shelter, and watched the news helicopters circle like vultures. The flood had come fast, faster than anyone expected. The levee in the industrial district had given way in the dead of night, and by morning, an entire community center was partially submerged. Inside were 47 people, children at a summer camp, teenagers at a youth leadership program, volunteers preparing meals for the homeless. They were trapped on the roof, the water still rising, the rescue boats delayed by traffic and bureaucratic confusion. Tom watched from behind the crowd barriers as the news cameras panned across the water. He heard the sirens and felt something crack open in his chest. He knew what it felt like to be alone, to be forgotten, to think that nobody was coming for you. He couldn't let those people feel that way. He walked straight to where a group of construction supervisors stood near a makeshift emergency coordination point. 3 men in hard hats, looking important and overwhelmed. They were debating the fastest route for the rescue vehicles. "You need 5 Mercedes trucks," Tom said quietly. His voice was so soft that one of them almost didn't hear him. The foreman turned, taking in Tom's appearance with a quick, dismissive glance. "Yeah, sure buddy. And I need a helicopter too. Move along." "No, listen," Tom insisted, and something in his tone made the second supervisor actually pay attention for a moment. "The main roads are all flooded. But there's an access point through the old quarry road, past the Miller property. It runs parallel to the water and comes up on the north side. Trucks could get through there. Mercedes trucks specifically, they sit higher than most, they've got the suspension to handle rough terrain, and they're heavy enough not to get bogged down in mud." All 3 men stared at him like he'd suggested they strap wings to their backs. "The old quarry road is barely a path anymore," the first one said, but there was a question in his voice. "I know every inch of it," Tom replied. "I've walked it 100 times. I sleep back there sometimes. It'll work." They laughed. It was the kind of laugh that came from exhaustion and stress and the absolute certainty that a homeless man couldn't possibly know anything useful. The foreman turned away, waving his hand dismissively. "We've got engineers and maps. We don't need advice from a guy who sleeps in the dirt." Tom felt the familiar sting of being invisible, but he didn't walk away. He stood there quietly, watching as they consulted their tablets and made their calls. He watched as the precious minutes ticked by. He watched as the helicopter footage showed the water climbing higher, the people on the roof huddling closer together. He watched a little girl, maybe 7, around Sarah's age, sitting on her mother's lap, and something inside him shattered into a million pieces. He left the emergency zone and started moving. He didn't have much, he never did, but he had his feet and he had knowledge they'd rejected. He went to every auto rental agency in the city. It took 3 hours and a lot of blank stares before a young manager at an industrial equipment rental company decided to take a chance on him. Maybe it was the desperation in his voice, or the way his hands shook when he described the situation, or maybe the manager was just the kind of person who believed in second chances. "I need 5 Mercedes trucks," Tom said, his voice steady now. I need them in the next hour, and I need drivers who aren't afraid to take them off-road. I'll pay whatever it costs. Or I won't, because I have nothing. But those people on that roof are running out of time. The manager made some calls. Tom never found out exactly what he said, but something in his words, or maybe it was Tom's words passed through him, created a small miracle. 20 minutes later, the manager had convinced his boss to donate 5 trucks. 25 minutes later, he'd gathered 5 experienced drivers who heard the urgency and said yes without needing much explanation. Tom led them through the city streets with the confidence of someone who finally mattered. He took them along roads most people had forgotten about, through passages that only showed up in memory. The quarry road was harder than he'd let on. There were places where they nearly got stuck, moments where the drivers questioned his judgment, but they pushed forward. When they finally emerged on the north side of the disaster zone, they could see the community center clearly. The water had risen another 2 feet since morning. What happened next moved quickly. The trucks became unlikely rescue vehicles, driving into the shallow water and ferrying people to safety. The helicopter footage captured it all. The image of an old man in rags directing traffic, helping lift children from roof to truck bed, his face streaked with tears and determination. It went viral because it told a story people needed to see, that you can't judge a book by its cover, that the invisible people are often the ones with the clearest vision, that kindness isn't measured by what you have but by what you're willing to give. By evening, all 47 people were safe. By the next morning, Tom's face was on every news station. By the end of the week, he'd been offered jobs, homes, and enough genuine kindness to last him the rest of his life. But the thing that mattered most happened 3 days later, when a little girl came to the temporary shelter where he was staying. She had a drawing she'd made, a man with wild gray hair standing in front of 5 trucks, surrounded by a golden light. She'd drawn it with crayons, her letters spelling out the word hero in letters that weren't quite straight. Tom held that drawing like it was made of crystal. He thought about Sarah, about his wife, about all the years he'd felt like a ghost. And he understood something that had taken him a lifetime to learn: being seen by one person who truly needed you was worth more than being invisible to 1,000 people who didn't.